Hello, my name is Meg Martin. I'm the Executive Director for Interfaith Works.
And my name is Corey Passons. I'm the Program Manager for Interfaith Relations with Interfaith Works.
Interfaith Works is a coalition of about 30 diverse faith communities, nonprofit organization that operates in Thurston County since 1974. We provide homeless services and connection to social justice and peace initiatives within our entire community.
And welcome to this episode of Lean In Olympia. This is a show that airs twice monthly that features conversations at the crossroads of humanity, justice, and belief. You can check out past episodes on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, and website at interfaith-works.org.
We are super excited today because we are here with another group of awesome candidates running for Olympia City Council. Interfaith Works does not and will not endorse a specific candidate for... Can I start that over? Okay. We are super excited to be here today with another group of awesome candidates running for the Olympia City Council. Interfaith Works does not and will not endorse a specific candidate, and we are committed to working together with anyone who is elected to represent our community. We would love to welcome our candidates today. We've got Clark Gilman for position number 4, Lisa Parshley, position number 5, Dontae Payne, position number 6, and Sarah DeStasio, position number 6. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks for being here. And a brief word on the format of our forum today. We'll be asking you questions that we've already emailed to you, and then we'll ask that you could please try to answer them within 2 minutes. We'll offer a little 20-second prompt when you're getting to that space of 2 minutes. And thank you for being here. We'll start off with our first question today. As Meg mentioned, we are a heritage coalition of 30 plus faith communities. And I just wanted to ask a question as we begin, or what are the central values that you bring to this role that will guide your decisions in civic leadership? And we're going to begin with Lisa and then go around the table.
Thank you, Corey. One of my central core values is that you have to leave this place better than you found it, which means you have to do service, and service to the community can be in many different ways. Because when it's all said and done, we will not be judged by the best of us, but by the least of us. So it's all of our jobs to make sure that everybody is better when we're all done. I also bring almost 15 years of scientific training through PhD and a doctorate. So I like to look at things with data, but life has taught me data is not enough. You have to look at the personal story, and you have to mix the data with the personal story to get the true intent of what the data actually means. I also believe in participatory democracy, which is the communities should lead themselves, which is why I ran for council the first time. We had just elected somebody, and I'm not going to mention his name, that made it look like the local communities were going to really have to step up and do a lot of this work themselves. And so I've trusted our community. I love Olympia. When it comes right down to it, the emotional part of this, I'm bringing a core value that I love Olympia. I love Olympians. I trust them to be thoughtful. I trust them to work together and find a compassionate, balanced view. And those are my core values.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. So I like to joke that I have a matrilineal service gene. My grandmother was a social worker, and then my mom is a retired psych nurse of 30 years. I'm also Jewish, and I consider myself a member of the religious left. And so the values that I was raised with here in Olympia and that I've carried into my adult life include providing assistance to people who need it, non-punitive approaches to conflict, and the idea of tikkun olam, healing the world, as the highest calling of individuals and communities. That idea of non-punitive approaches to conflict, of restorative justice, also very much informs my approach to working in groups. And I've said this before, that we campaign as if it's a council of one person, but it's a council of a number of people. And so being able to work respectively, constructively, and collaboratively across political differences, because we live in a community where there's a diversity of perspectives, is very important to me. And I think speaks to a deeper value of recognizing and believing that we're capable of solving all conflicts without violence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I?
Please.
All right. Boy, a lot comes to my head when I think about values, and I start with sort of sorting out. I've often taught about corporate versus community values, and the first thing that really strikes me is that assuming that the brilliance is in the room, we don't need subject matter experts, and we probably don't need a dozen studies, but you bring a room full of people together and the brilliance is there in that room. The other thing that really comes to mind for me that I feel very strongly is that government is a good thing, and that the purpose of government is to advocate for the interests of the many, of the majority of people. And to amplify that a little bit, I see the city of Olympia as a collection of people rather than a collection of investment, real estate properties, or potential growth. So I think that efforts that the city takes on should be to benefit the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And then the last value is one that my grandma was really clear about when I was starting to be a union leader. And she said, don't ever wear work clothes to a meeting where you're representing poor people. So I just keep that in mind, that it's a privilege to be representing the carpenters I worked alongside, my cousins, the poor people I know in town on city council. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so the values that I think I bring to my candidacy and that I would bring to city council, I think that it's important to have integrity. I think people are looking for authenticity, and they're looking for people to be honest with them, and I think that's really important, especially in government. I would say that I also, not only was I raised with the value of service, but I also would say that the Army has instilled so much of that in me as well. One of the core Army values is selfless service. And I think a lot about what that means to be selfless. And I would say that putting others' needs before your own is something that I think is exactly what people of the highest ideals for elected officials is what they want to see. They want to see a person that is not going to step into this role with just self-interest, but the interest of everyone who lives here. And I think that that's something that not only that I get from the Army, but I was raised to reach back. And I feel that that's what I'm doing. I was raised to reach back to those in need and pull them along. And I've been able to create a wonderful life here in Olympia for me and my family, and I want the same for everyone else who lives here. And like Sarah, I'm also Jewish, and Tikkun Olam is repair the world, is a incredible value that we are taught from Judaism, and I think that it's something that I certainly carry with me, and so I think it's important that I have that perspective for anything that I do in life.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. There are well over 1,000 residents of Thurston County who have no roof over their head every night. They are sleeping in doorways, wooded areas, and places without basic necessities for human survival. When you hear this, how does this make you feel personally? And the second part of this question is, what actions will you take to decrease homelessness in your next term as Olympia City Council member? Sarah, we'll start with you.
Thank you. and you may need to use the 20-second warning with this one.
That's fair.
And I'll start with the second part first. So our One Community Plan talks about how sometimes sweeps are necessary and that they should be done in a way that minimizes the potential for re-traumatization. So as a mental health counselor in training, I have many thoughts about that, but I want to hone in on the word trauma because we know that being unhoused has a lot of trauma that comes with it, trauma that can impact decision-making, that can impact having stable relationships, that can impact meeting personal goals like sobriety, right? And so I think that we need to, when we're talking about diminishing homelessness, go to the root and talk about how can we, in the moment, immediately reduce trauma for unhoused people in our community. And I say by providing services. And the kind of services I'm thinking about, of course, are public-private partnerships that give people access to food, that give them access to hygiene products like pads and tampons, that the city makes sure that there's sanitation services like porta potties and garbage service. And I had the experience of cleaning up, helping folk clean up the Deschutes encampment and seeing overflowing porta potties and dumpsters, and then 2 days later being told by someone in local government that that encampment was being adequately serviced. So I applaud the work of the Regional Housing Council, and I applaud the scattered site plan, and we have to make sure that there's not a disconnect between what's actually happening and what we're saying that we're doing. And in terms of how it makes me feel personally, I consider homelessness to be a humanitarian crisis. And so we have to strike and strike hard with every toolbox in our arsenal to make sure that we are treating our unhoused neighbors as residents of our community and meet their needs.
Thank you.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is that poster about the Golden Rule. And I think that every faith community that's part of Interfaith Works has a version of treat others as you'd like to be treated yourself. And it's clearly still an aspirational goal because we sure the heck aren't doing it now. A lot of my feelings come from knowing people who are street dependent with various challenges that make that the best place for them, and unhoused folks, and knowing that they have stories, that they have favorite flavors of ice cream, that they have a mom, that drives a lot of my feelings. That they're people, and a place where I've been able to channel a lot of those feelings is my family's been part of First Christian Church downtown, and I kind of feel like we've been a community that says yes in a city that says maybe. And the last thing on sort of the values and the feeling part is that I really firmly believe that we have the abundance and we have the knowledge to house everybody and feed everybody. And if that's true, then it's a choice. It's an actual choice to have winners and losers and have folks unhoused. I'm glad for the work, and I see that one of the proudest accomplishments of the last few years of our council is sort of institutionalizing a human service response within the city, bringing employees in, pivoting the focus. But I'll also say that it's all aimed at a Band-Aid. It's all aimed at addressing the symptoms, and we're still not getting to basic needs, housing and health care for everybody. So, gotcha.
Thank you.
So I would say that, when I first arrived here in Washington, I had never seen such visible homelessness before. And it was something that was very surprising to me. And I immediately felt empathy. It was the first thing I felt. And I remember just thinking, okay, I'm giving out dollars. I am taking people to get something to eat. We are taking our Thanksgiving Day leftovers and giving it to people in camps. What else could I do? And that was really one of the issues that really drove me to run. was homelessness. And, I think about a lot of families actually, and how many people are not very far off from being in that situation. And so I encourage people to see themselves in our homeless residents, and perhaps, that will move us to act. And I think that as a city, the city has been incredibly just resourceful and have come up with very creative ways to address the issue. But I think that local governments are incredibly restrained, and they have limitations in the budget for what we can do. And I think we need the governments that have the larger budgets to prioritize homelessness and housing affordability, the county, the state, and the federal government. And I intend to continue to advocate and lobby those governments to put more dollars into addressing this need for our community.
Thank you.
I'm assuming it's good for me to go. Quite a few years ago, I learned, and this statement has stayed with me. Walking through the city of Seattle and the streets of Seattle, we walked around an alcove where there was a couple people camping, and my friend looked at me and she said, "Lisa, 10 seconds." And I'm like, "What's 10 seconds?" And she goes, 10 seconds between you and that person, you being that person sitting in that alcove, trying to figure out where you're going to get your food and how you're going to stay dry tonight. Those words have stayed with me, along with my grandfather's words, which I said in the beginning, that you have to leave this better. So every time I see someone who's homeless, or have toured some of the camps as a city council member, it breaks my heart. It's a responsibility of our government. It's a right, in my mind. It should have been in the Declaration of Independence, that housing is a right. Everybody should have the right. When I was elected the first time in 2017, it was a discussion of, do we sweep or do we actually take this problem on? I felt like the people who were saying sweep were trying to make these people disappear. You cannot make people disappear. So I am proud of some of the actions we've done in the city. Our One Community Plan, watching our community wrestle as a community to come up with this plan. And I'm very proud of the actions we can potentially do in it. Now that the pandemic's over, some of them are going to be possible. We have continued to work on others. The scattered sites, everything else. But unless we work on a few other things, we will not solve homelessness. The cost of housing, getting livable wages, and making sure we stabilize those who are renting, which are 54% of the people in Olympia. So we need to do those things to make sure that we continue the work of the One Community Plan and these things.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. So our next question goes to law enforcement, and we'll begin with Clark. Clark, so what specific ideas and proposals do you have about Olympia law enforcement related to reform, budget, and accountability?
Thank you. Law enforcement has come front and center on our agenda, really from the George Floyd murder moment forward. And I see it as this beautiful opportunity, and it's really both to address oppression of marginalized communities and also trying to make a more just and humane system for everybody who interacts with the criminal justice system. And I am proud of the efforts that came from the last 5 years of our public safety levy, community policing, beginning familiar faces, the crisis response unit, having the ambassadors downtown, restoring the walking patrol, and having training, both implicit bias and de-escalation training for our patrol officers. Those are all good things, but they haven't changed the numbers, right? They haven't changed the racially disproportionate interactions with officers, incarceration. So that's still a huge challenge for us to take on. And I guess if I were going to close with one thought, it's that the city will respond to people in crisis and moments of conflict. It's not a discussion of whether or not the police will come. It's a discussion of whether or not the city will respond. And that could be a commissioned uniformed officer, it could be somebody else. But I think that thread of the conversation is messing us up with everybody worried about when will the police car arrive. That's not the answer. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So we need to reimagine public safety and the idea of public safety and policing for the city of Olympia. I think that we need to look at, start from the beginning and look at what it takes to become an officer in the Olympia Police Department. And training is important, implicit bias training, but I also think education is important. And what I mean by education is do recruits have an understanding of systemic racism and how it impacts policing, how it impacts systems and laws in our country, and how those systems have projected subconscious thoughts in people's minds, which makes implicit bias training relevant. But I think that we have to start there. When someone like me is pulled over, does the officer understand that we are already thinking about how this situation could escalate very quickly for us? And that should be something that they understand without me having to utter a word or express anything. And sometimes people have, fight or flight response, and we wonder to ourselves, well, why would they flee from the police? And it's because of fear of what we've seen a lot of the times. So I say that we should incorporate more training. We should be making sure that we allocate funding for body cameras for police officers, looking at the police union contract, also looking at the probationary period and if there is any correlation between that and officers who have high records of misconduct. Those are some actions that we can take to actually reform the police for the better.
Thank you.
That was really good. I have a yes and answer because I completely agree with Clark on the city has done a lot of things, but we still have a problem. We heard statistics this spring through the Public Safety Ad Hoc Committee that indicated that while we have 84% white and only 3 to 4% African Americans, we are seeing an arrest rate of 12 to 13% for the African Americans, which means we have a 3 to 4 times higher chance for our African Americans in the community to be arrested than Clark or I do. What's sad to me is that is statewide. It is not just Olympia. We have a systemic problem we have to get at, and we need to get the data to do that. But the computer systems, the technology, they're not recording all of this, so we can't even begin to take apart why is there such this disparity. What is the problem? Is it societal? Is it how the police interact? Is it the justice system? So one of the things I would also like to see, besides training, is that the police academy takes this on, because every single officer you hire has to go through academy. So we need to do that. The second thing, as the city needs to do, is we are in the middle of a public process where the community is going to define public safety to us. Once we get this definition in a plan, we need to take apart and de-silo our whole justice system. It can't just be about the police, because when you look at our budget, for example, you don't have an automatic understanding of how much we're spending on familiar faces or crew. So we need to de-silo that, pull it apart, and pull the police chief out of the executive level and put one person in charge of that public safety department that is an executive, and the police chief reports to them. So de-silo, align our budget, do the training, and yes, and.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to start with something that feels crucial to me, which is civilian oversight of the police. So during this last legislative session, there was a bill that didn't pass that said each department with 15 people or more should have a civilian oversight board or commission. And there was an ordinance that just passed in Chicago that does exactly that, creates a commission that has the ability to hire their police auditor and pass policy, right? With a city council with aldermen that can veto it with a 2/3 vote. So there's an additional level of oversight there too. But so Christy Lopez, who oversaw the justice investigation into the Ferguson case, said that every department is different, and we should take advantage of individual departments in individual cities being able to work in a way that works for those communities. So I think we need to take advantage of the opportunity to be a demonstration site for civilian oversight of the police. When it comes to budgeting, a coalition of organizations, including BLAST, including the Olympia Democratic Socialists, did hard work to put together budget recommendations that would reallocate money from the police to other services. And as a council member, I would take those recommendations seriously because, again, I believe in civilian oversight of the police. I also think about that we had a whole slew of important laws that passed this year. And what happens now, what it comes down to now, is enforceability. How do we make sure that officers are getting the education and training that they need? And if things don't go as planned, how are we disciplining and how are we documenting so that those officers can engage in restorative processes with the communities they've harmed?
Thank you.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Can you please describe how you plan to engage with the various religious and spiritual communities in our region? And we will start
And
with
that
Dontae.
goes to me.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. I consider myself to be a spiritual person. And I guess I would start with my own community, which is Temple Beth Tefillah here in Olympia. And also, shout out to Rabbi Seth and Rabbi Yosef, Chabad of Olympia. The both of them have just been incredible to me, very welcoming when I came here to Olympia. But they've also they have incredible connections to the faith community here locally. And so I would start there. And I think it's important to look to our nonprofit sectors, to look at various different communities so that there is representation of religious diversity at the table. Something that we often don't think about as relevant to our work in government, but it certainly is. And I think it's important that we make sure that we ask ourselves who's missing in these situations when we are at the table discussing issues. Who is missing, who may have a perspective, and I think it's important that we go out and we seek that perspective. And so that's how I would incorporate religious communities into the work.
Thank you. Shout out also to Rabbi Seth's TikTok page, which is
amazing.
Amazing.
It's amazing.
And on fire, and I learn so much from it all the time. I love it so much. Okay.
We can endorse rabbis, but not candidates.
Yeah.
I was wondering. That was good. I would have to shout out to Rabbi Seth because he's been kind enough to have conversations with me. And I think this goes with any portion of our community. We need to intentionally reach in. We can't wait for people to come to us. We need to reach in to the Judean portions of our community, the Muslim, the Catholic, the Protestant. We need to intentionally reach in, but also remain open to conversations like the concerned clergy and interfaith. If I have always tried, if I'm asked for a meeting, absolutely, let's sit down and talk, because I believe in the foundation of our country, which is freedom of religion. That's why we're here, and that everybody should have the freedom to practice their specific religion. And just look at what Interfaith has done with the work with homelessness. It also is how we do what I've said all along, serve our communities and make our communities just a little bit better than we found them. So one, intentionally reach in and be open and listen, and then take that back to City Council and keep it in mind as we're working forward, because it's also how participatory democracy works. So we have to do all of those things.
Thanks. Well, it's notoriously difficult to get who a faith leader is voting for out of them, except on their personal Facebook page. So faith communities are stakeholders, and we don't always think of them that way. But I think it's vital to think about faith communities as communities that can be mobilized in support of our core values, in support of city projects. And it's in the interest of the city to cultivate meaningful relationships with faith leaders and with faith communities.
Great.
Thanks.
I feel really lucky that as I'm hearing the answers, I'm thinking, well, this is just sort of part of my life, that I worked with concerned clergy on a couple of different initiatives to bring to the city, that I've stood along with people from several different faith traditions at the Day of Remembrance, and at blessings of places where violent crimes happened and people lost their lives. So that's part of what carries me through in this work, is being in community with those folks. And I guess, so I can hear the sort of political parts of how do you mobilize more through there, but I also find it as this safe refuge place to get my heart and spirit part lined back up with the policy kinds of things and the very slow grind of government change, to be a place of hope and recharging. So I guess that's my obtuse answer to the question about engaging with the faith communities.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Our next question moves to issues of access to government, and Lisa, we're back to you for starting. Tell us about your specific plans to increase access to government. How will you include racial and ethnic minorities, low-income people, folks who live in shelters and on the street, youth, elders, and other marginalized people in planning for our community's future?
That's an excellent question. It's a question that I feel like I've been battling since I was running the first time. How do we make sure that we engage all the voices when we make decisions at the council or the city staff makes? There's a couple things. First, the council has stated, and I'm 100% behind this, that we have to revamp how we're communicating with the community. It's not just what we are saying, but it's how we're taking this information in and then turning around and saying, we heard you. That is something that, honestly, I think the city can do far, far better at. We have hired a consultant. We're working our way through that. We're recognizing that we have to hire more communications specialists because we don't have enough. So one, we have to learn how to let people know they're heard. So the communication. Now, as far as bringing in the voices that have been absent, and sometimes glaringly absent, I will toot my horn a little bit. One of the things that I got inspired to do after watching that long 9 minutes of George Floyd's life ending was that we needed a human rights commission in Olympia, and we needed it to have real serious teeth. So I put on the dais, and all of the council members approved the formation of this Human Rights Commission, which now is called the Social Justice and Equity Commission. We have 5 founding members who will be coming back to council with an ordinance that will formally seat this commission. My hope is that it will have the same teeth as the Planning Commission and will impact policy and actions and resolutions for the future, and that on this commission will be these voices. I'll end with the youth, because sometimes they don't get their voice heard, and that's in climate. They are telling us they want an earth to live on when they're 40 or 50, so we need to work on getting their voice somehow into the city.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think about three things. I think about accessibility, outreach, and also a civilian oversight piece and enforceability. So for accessibility, as a person with invisible disabilities, this is something that's very important to me and that I've thought about a lot. This is as simple as making the website more readable. It can be as simple as ensuring that hybrid options are available before council meetings return to City Hall. And it can look like, and this is an outreach piece also, advertising widely in places where folk who frequently make comments at city council meetings may not go, reaching new people. And I think it's very important that as council members, that we're not just at city-sponsored events or nonprofit fundraisers, that we're helping clean up Deschutes, that we're on the picket line, and that we're out there digging into the nitty-gritty with constituents. And I also support the work of the Social Justice and Equity Commission, and I want there to be enforceability mechanisms. So I support that commission being able to make a resolution of no confidence about a council member who doesn't vote in a way that lines up with equity. I support that body being able to do policy setting, like what the Civilian Oversight Commission for Police does in Chicago. Even if those decisions could be overridden by council, it's a very different kind of relationship than just making public comment. It forces a different kind of debate. And you could do it with any community, unhoused folks, youth, anyone directly impacted that we as city council members and future city council members would want directly involved in our policy setting and our votes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate what we've just heard from you, Lisa and Sarah, thinking that there's both an element of a better communication, better invitation, and then there's also a question of how do we better respect the people who come to offer a comment, and how do we actually imagine incorporating some of those ideas and comments into decision making. And I think what's most striking to me about the list that Corey read us and the additional categories that you both brought up is we have a long list of who's not invited to the table and a very narrow definition of who is appropriately at the table. And I'll give you an anecdote. In my first year on council, I had a run of people who were coming sort of dressed in unorthodox ways and having pretty strong ways of saying things, who all seemed to know my name. And it became sort of a running joke on the dais at council that, so Clark knows all these people, but it's just the truth of cruising through the alleys downtown for my life that they are people I know, and I invited them to come on down if they had an idea that we were talking about at the park. And I don't think that we respect voices outside of sort of MPA policy prepared, busman's holiday policy professionals at the state who come down to Wayne at the city. And we would be a much stronger and more resilient community if we were making those decisions with a broader spectrum of the people who make up Olympia.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go back to something I stated earlier, which is about asking ourselves who is missing. And I think we have to start there. We have to do a gap analysis of what areas are we missing, who is missing. And I think that's important because what we've seen, unfortunately, from government is that it tends to just go along with the status quo, or those who are already informed or involved in some way. And so we have to be very intentional about seeking people who are not connected, perhaps, to politics or to government, who perhaps are from other professions. I think that could be valuable to us. And that we're actually going to deliver, that we're actually going to incorporate the feedback that they provide to us. I think is how you will encourage more people to participate when they actually see that it is worth their time and investment, and that the work is being taken seriously, and that they're actually participating in something that's going to bring about change in our community. And so I think it's important that we make sure that we're doing that and that we hold ourselves accountable to it. And we also need to make sure that we are identifying various types of people to represent various types of communities. We should not just have one individual to represent a community, but we should continue to have more people to represent that community, because one person is certainly not reflective of, of all of the thoughts that goes with any particular group or anything of that nature. And so I think we just get more positive feedback that way, and we have better outcomes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Final question here. And Sarah, we'll start with you. Is there anything else in closing that you'd like our audience to know about how you plan on making our community a better place?
A quick story.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't expect to be here. I made the decision to run in late January when a friend, late at night on her patio, asked me without asking to do it. And now here I am. And that's relevant to this question because I consider myself answerable to the organizations that are supporting me. So that includes the Thurston County Democrats, the platform of the local and state party. It includes the Olympia Democratic Socialists. It includes the Thurston County Progressives, their points of unity. So I am not here for myself. I'm here for those organizations. I'm here for every Olympian. And also, a very favorite word of mine is coalition. So I'm passionate about cementing the relationships that already exist between the city and other jurisdictions, the city and other organizations, and building new relationships with other organizations and other communities that maybe have felt like they have no reason to engage with the city because the city is not concerned with their needs. And as a sidebar, I think overwhelmingly with those communities and organizations, the city is concerned with those needs, but the messaging has not been right or the timing has not been right to build those strong relationships or that sturdy coalition that we're going to need as we deal with climate change, as we combat the ongoing specter of racism, the specter of misogyny, and the vast income inequality that causes so much suffering for so many here and elsewhere.
Thank you.
Well, if I think of one thing that I might do to make a better community, it's to keep trying to hold the doors of City Council open and the doors of City Hall open to more folks. And I want to circle back to that last question, just amplify a little bit that I want to shout out my friend Cece Coates and her piss pot. Because when I say my friend Cece, I don't mean like sympathy, empathy, it was touching when I saw her. What I mean is she and I worked together as union carpenters, and we worked together upstairs a block from here in union governance, that it was a workplace injury. It was that 10 seconds you're talking about that changed her life to living on Social Security disability in her van. But she's still the same awesome person who I've known for almost 30 years, right? But she's considered some sort of a problem for coming in. She's brilliant, she's right. We do have the abundance. we have so much overflowing resources and we're being super stingy about it. So if there was one thing that I want to focus on, it's keeping the doors open to many voices, just as you all three talked about so eloquently in that last question.
Thanks.
So I would say that something that I want you all to know about me is that I come from very humble beginnings. I grew up in inner city Philadelphia. I've seen the worst of humanity sometimes, I think, in a lot of ways. And I've also seen some beautiful moments that have come out of that. And my story is one of resilience, I think. I've certainly overcome a lot. And I have made a commitment to reach back, as I said earlier. And I think that it's important to keep that perspective as I serve on council. I have not only professional experience, which I developed, eventually, but I also have a very important lived experience that I think is missing and that we need on the city council. And that's why representation matters. If I'm elected, I would be the first Black male to be on Olympia City Council in city history. And why is that relevant or important is because, as I said, there are just certain experiences, I think as a Black male specifically, that are very shared experiences that I think we would all be better off if we had a diversity of thought, diversity of experience, and opinion on the city council. And so that's why I'm honored to not only represent myself, but to represent so many people who feel that they can't see themselves in our local officials. And so I'm happy to be running for City Council Position 6, and I'd be honored to have your vote.
Thanks.
Thank you.
What's something that I would like people to know is, well, it's simple. Since I've been on council, we've had 3 declared crises: homelessness, COVID, and the council just this winter declared climate change an emergency. We've seen the county declare racism a health crisis. We have recovery from the COVID economy. We have income inequality. We have a housing crisis. We have climate change. We have sea level rise. And we have a big decision to make about the lake that's going to impact this. In the 3.5 years I've been there, I feel like I'm finally learning how to work in an effective way with 6 other people. That's a skill. That takes work because you have to respect them and respect your voice and somehow come through it so that you can represent and serve the people and make our community just a little bit better than when we were elected. So I'm bringing that to this office and for my reelection run. I see all of these things as interconnected. If we do not simultaneously work on all of them, we will not succeed in any of them. We have to work on all of them. But we are at a unique moment, especially being able to redesign our economy. We can turn it green. We can make it more equitable. We can get a middle class potentially growing again. So this is a crisis, but we can turn a crisis into an opportunity. I also see that. And I see that each member of that city council is going to bring a voice to all of those crises, and that we all serve together. And lastly, I'm here to serve the people of Olympia. I love Olympia. So that's, if I had one thing left to say, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of our candidates today: Sarah DeStasio, Clark Gilman, Dontae Payne, Lisa Parshley. Appreciate you being here today for this special candidate forum edition of Lean in Olympia.
And to everybody watching, thank you for being here with us today. Please stay in touch through our website and social media, as the coming months will have lots of exciting developments, including the opening of a new 5-story permanent supportive housing development and emergency shelter building at 2828 Martin Way, as well as a new development that is going to support service connection and hygiene services at 3444 Martin Way that Interfaith Works is working on in partnership with lots and lots of folks in the community. Thank you for being here, and I hope that everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.